Good morning, everyone. Finally, I got to be on the screen here. So I have prepared this talk um, over, I don't know, the last 6 months, but also there are elements from very old times and some things that are new also. The title of the talk is Zen, Our Future and the Sacred Feminine. Um, After the storm, the calm, the change in government and the purification of vaccinations has been like the light at the end of the tunnel, or better to say, a light somewhere in the tunnel, as the fight for the survival of life on Earth continues unabated. During the past year, we learned to bunker down, and we might have connected with aspects of ourselves that were overshadowed by our super busy life before the pandemic. Or maybe the pandemic helped us to connect with deeper aspects of our hearts. The grief we felt, the things we lost. We are no longer blind regarding the situation of the earth. Many people have gone through the dark night of the soul, and their hearts are more open than ever. The old frantic consumerism was severed to some extent by the pandemic, and maybe many people have come in closer contact with the sacredness of life and all life, the sacredness of their lives and all life. The sacred is innate to our consciousness, and people of all time have experienced it. Our first ancestors experienced the sacred dimension of life as the mother. She was honored as the creative source of life, which, containing in herself the feminine and masculine aspects of being, gave birth to humanity and all of creation. 100,000 years ago, the Neanderthal man performed rituals, burials, and ceremonies to their dead. They believed that their people vanished like the moon from the world of the living, to be reborn again like the moon. To the three phases of the moon, waxing, full, and waning, a fourth phase was added, the 3 days of darkness, where the moon cannot be seen and can only be imagined. The fourth invisible phase was understood as the invisible dimension where new life is gestated and from which the old moon is reborn as the new moon. It makes perfect sense, their way of thinking. When the invisible dimension or dark phase of the moon was included as an essential part of the cycle of light, the dark was included as an essential part of the cycle of light. Our human ability to visualize and to imagine was born. As the great light shining in the darkness of the night, the moon was regarded by our first ancestors as one of the supreme images of the goddess. When we do the Tara practices, she always appears sitting on a moon disk, and white Tara it is said to be the color of the brightest moon in the fall. Now imagine that you are one of our primitive ancestors of 100,000 years ago. The dark pitch blackness of the caves must have felt terrifying. And then suddenly, this beautiful illuminating disk appears in the dark sky. If I had been there, I would have made prostrations to the moon as the sphere of benevolence of the Great Mother. Regarding the psyche, Carl Jung writes, its ancestry goes back many millions of years, sprung from a perennial rhizome beneath the earth, and it would find itself, referring to the psyche, in better accordance with the truth if it took the existence of the rhizome into its calculations, for the root matter is the mother of all things. So I'm gonna say it in my own words. He says that the lineage, the dominion, the ancestry of our own mind goes back millions of years. Our own mind, the depth of our own mind goes back millions of years, and that it was born from that root matter underneath the earth, and we would find ourselves in better harmony with the truth if we would if we would consider the existence of this rhizome, the root matter, which is not other but the mother of all things. Jungian analysts and historians Anne Baring and Julie Cashford write in The Myth of the Goddess. At the beginning of time, the great mother goddess was conceived as both origin and goal, the giver of life and the dwelling place of the dead, transformer of the life she brought out of herself in a cycle of time as perpetual and enduring as the moon. Life and death were not perceived as opposites. Death and darkness, as life and light, were seen as aspects of the mother, like the moon phases succeeding each other in an endless rhythm. We can still hear the resonance of this ancient teaching in the chant of the identity of the relative and absolute. Within light there is darkness, but do not try to understand that darkness. Within darkness there is light, but do not look for that light. Light and darkness are a pair, like the foot before and the foot behind in walking. In the Mother Goddess tradition, the Black Goddess represented the luminous darkness. But the chant says, do not look for that light. Why? If we look for it, we will miss it. It is like it is taught in the verse of the koan 23rd of the Mumonkan. It says, you may describe it, but in vain. Picture it, but no avail. You can never praise it fully. Stop all your groping and maneuvering. There is nowhere to hide the true self. When the world collapses, it is indestructible. So this last line, when the world collapses, it is indestructible. That is an experience of the luminous darkness. Or you can use this line, where the world collapses, it is indestructible, as a koan, and it might lead you to the experience of the luminous darkness. Now, going back to the experience of the sacred, an ancient Zen koan, which is koan number 6 of the Mumonkan, says that when the Buddha was at Mount Gurakutra to give a talk, he held up a flower before the assembly. At this, all remained silent. The venerable Kasho alone broke into a smile. Mahakasho and the Buddha united their heart minds in the experience of the sacred emptiness of a floor. There was a recognition there at that moment when the Buddha lifts the flower and Mahakasho sees the flower. There was a moment of union, of transmission, actually, mind to mind, the same experience of the same. In this case was the sacred emptiness of the flower. In another koan, a monk asked Master Tosan, "What is Buddha?" Tosan said, 3 pounds of flax. This is Mumonkan case 18. Master Tosan experienced the 3 pounds of flax as sacred emptiness, sacredness, or holiness. In order to be sacred or holy, need to be empty. In the koan of the Emperor and Bodhidharma, Blue Cliff Record, Case 1, the Emperor of Southern China asked the Great Master Bodhidharma, "What is the highest meaning of the Holy Truth?" What is the highest meaning of the Holy Truth? Ah, that reminds me a koan that says, "What's the last word of Zen?" And to that, I just wash my teeth. So, is this kind of question that impossible to answer? That's what the emperor is asking. What is the highest meaning of the Holy Truth? I could say I eat my meals at noon every day, but that maybe would have infuriated the emperor a lot more than Bodhidharma did, or at least the legend says he did. So Bodhidharma replied, "Emptiness without holiness." This was a good teaching for the emperor, who seemed to have the idea of a fixed, solid thing that we can call the Holy Truth. And not only the Holy Truth, he also wants to know what's the highest meaning of the Holy Truth. But emptiness without holiness is not a statement to be taken out of context. The holiness that the emperor was referring to was not empty. He was looking for something solid, very solid. Bodhidharma, with his response, walks away the emperor's concepts of the Holy Truth. Or at least Bodhidharma tried to walk away the concepts about the Holy Truth. Intrinsically, everything is wholly empty. However, the moment we talk about it, we muddy that experience. Then the emperor asks again, "Who is facing me?" Bodhidharma replied, "Don't know." This is Bodhidharma's answer and his expression of emptiness. Don't know. Again, he's expressing emptiness. Our ancestors of 100,000 or 30,000 years ago recognized that they didn't know. They lived in the mind of the not known. Their minds were empty of patriarchal conditioning. They were open to all possibilities. Because of their not knowing minds, they survived rough conditions and they were able to bring forth humanity. When our ancestors look at their surroundings, the animals, the plants, the moon, the caves, the rain, the sun. They intuitively knew, felt, and recognized all creations as the manifestation of the Mother. I had the blessing of encountering Lex Hickson. I didn't know much about him. I did I did have a book about him, Mother of All the Buddhas, but I found this other book, which is Mother of the Universe, Mother of the Universe, and I have some quotes here for you. And he says he was a Sufi master. He was a scholar in all religions. And he was also empowered as a Zen master by our own Bernie Glassman. So he is in our lineage, Lex Hickson. And actually, when we were watching the ceremonies from CCLA and the memorial ceremonies for Maisumi Roshi, I heard his name as part of the ancestors that had passed from the White Plum. I heard his name. He died very young, only 53 years old. But anyway, he's pretty amazing. He says, the Great Mother is humanity's most primordial, pervasive, and fruitful image of reality. She illuminates the entire universe because she is not some local or limited goddess, but our universal mother, our universal mother. She is recognized in Mahayana Buddhism as Prajnaparamita, and he says, the depth of unthinkability, mother of all the Buddhas. I just love this depth of unthinkability. Can you can you fathom that? Can you close your eyes and feel the depth of unthinkability? Because that is what we call our universal mother, the depth of unthinkability. Is so deep. I mean, the depth of unthinkability. It's like saying the depth of unfathomability. Can you fathom the depth of unfathomability? How to write it, because that's a very difficult word. Yeah. Just very beautiful and also very profound. And he continues, the goddess tradition appears in its more undiluted form today within the ancient tantric lineages of Hinduism and Buddhism, which are being passed on intact even to the present generation. Hickson continues, for several years during infancy and childhood, both female and male children relate in essentially the same mode and intensity to the mother love, at the core to their daily existence. There is no difference. Boys and girls relate to the mother the same way when they are children. And then he says, the one we call father is only mother number two with bearded or abrasive face. He says, all longing is for mother, all sustenance is mother. For 9 months, her heartbeat is our rhythm, our primal music. This is the original ground prior to gender differentiation. This is the original ground prior to gender differentiation. To which goddess tradition gives us access. not as an infantile regression, but as the fruitful soil of reconciliation, harmony, tenderness without boundary, unity of wisdom, and totality. Men and women that follow these practices are not fundamentally dependent on the biological and culturally conditioned abstractions of masculine and feminine. The mother, the universal mother in herself carries both feminine and masculine in perfect harmony and perfect union. But then when we come into the world of differentiation, then feminine and masculine split, and suddenly they are no more in perfect harmony. In fact, then they start, separating, overpowering, conquering, dominating. But originally, it was not like that, and our primitive ancestors understood that, and that's why they were able to maintain a life of survival, peace, and mutual cooperation to bring forth humanity. For our Paleolithic and Neolithic ancestors, even the faintest of the stars were seen as the iridescent drops of milk streaming from the breast of the mother. The galaxy that came to be called the Milky Way. Zen practice teaches about being empty. In Zen, this empty mind is true knowing. We call it not knowing. We also say that not knowing is most intimate. It is through the experience of the emptiness of all things that many practitioners over the centuries have realized the interconnectedness and the interdependence of all things in the fabric of life and death. Our Paleolithic and Neolithic ancestors understood the interconnectedness and the interdependence of all things. And this understanding was undoubtedly a very important factor in the survival and evolution of humanity. The myth of the goddess emphasized the unity of all things, and this understanding was the foundation for the morality of the age. It was like maintaining their precepts. They tried to maintain the unity of all things. According to Bering and Cashford, the most startling difference between Paleolithic people and our contemporary civilization lies in the awe and reverence that our ancestors felt for the animals and the earth. The animals were seen as teachers of fundamental laws within both animals and humans were bound. Contained within the goddess myth was the hunter's myth, in which the hunter needed to continually rupture this unity in order to survive. Hunter and hunted were seen in a continuum of relationship in which life and death were part of an eternal process, as they had learned from the moon. The presence of the shaman in the caves indicated how important it was for our original ancestors not to forget the relationship with the whole. The shaman performs hunting rituals and journeys in the darkest parts of the caves, mediating between two worlds, the seen and the unseen dimensions, relating the hunt to the deeper meaning of the whole and healing the rupture. Around the year 2000 BC, which coincide with the middle of the Bronze Age, with the continuing invasions of nomadic warrior tribes, the myth of the warrior separated from the myth of the goddess. When this happened, the connection with the invisible dimension was lost. The myth of the hunter grew into the myth of the warrior hero and came to overshadow the myth of the goddess, which was relegated to the unconscious shadow of humanity. The notion of the underworld with darkness, lifelessness, and menace was not present in our human consciousness until the trauma and anarchy of late Bronze Age around 1000 BC. Paleolithic and Neolithic people didn't fight each other. They lived in peace, harmony, and mutual cooperation with each other. The fabric of connections, interdependence, and sacredness of our ancestors was further broken with the advent of the Judeo-Christian tradition. After all, wasn't Eve accused of causing the fall of humanity? I talk plenty about that in my book, The Zen Priestess and the Snake, so I won't go into that now. But since the development of our patriarchal civilization that is currently destroying our planet was rooted in the suppression, persecution, and denial of the sacred feminine, doesn't it make sense that if we want to heal, it would be good to reclaim the sacred feminine from the shadows of our own unconscious mind, where she still is, together with the possibilities for peace, guidance, and survival? Jung writes in his collected works, volume 18, "The knowledge of all the human race is stored within the psyche. The knowledge of all the human race is stored within the psyche as the rhizome, the original root, you can call it, and potentially available to each one of us." Very powerful. Jung talks about a human being who has a personal unconscious exclusive to each individual, but also a collective unconscious, an unconscious mind that is inherited by every member of the human race. He says that an experience of the race is never lost, but it is transmitted down the race, as are the more obvious instinctive and learned processes, and that the whole history of the human race is in some way always alive in the psyche as part of being humans. Jung continues, "Nothing which is part of the psyche is ever lost. To live fully, we have to reach down and bring back to life the deepest levels of the psyche from which our present consciousness has evolved." The Paleolithic vision of survival, unity, connection, and interdependence is still within us and accessible today. As things get tougher for the planet, we will instinctively find a way to reach the rhizome of life, the source of true knowledge within us. We wrote in The Great Hard Way on how to use the power of awareness developed from doing Zazen to notice when our emotions or our feelings surface and when or how we try to suppress them. It was kind of a new thing 20 years ago. to say that we could use the power of our zazen to detangle our personality. Then we found this quote from Jung that said, meditation seems to be the royal road to the unconscious mind. Meditation seems to be the royal road to the unconscious mind. This is what happened to me. One day, after years of practicing Zazen intensively, I felt as if a vortex of light had opened in my body-mind, and it was showing me the existence of a benevolent deity that was venerated in the distant past. Now, in these times of climate crisis, when I speak of the importance of connecting with the mother of all things, in ourselves for the survival of humanity, I found this other quote of Jung that I mentioned before, in which he says that underneath all of the layers of our conscious and unconscious mind, there, underneath all of that, there is the experience of the mother of all things as the original root. It is very powerful to have Jung's support on this also. Jung describes the totality of the human consciousness as a collective human being, combining the characteristics of both sexes, transcending youth and age, birth and death, and from having at its command a human experience of 1 or 2 million years. During the last 4 centuries, we have been trained in the patriarchal ways of thinking. We have forgotten what it feels like being born in a universe that we perceive as the benign mother, which equally contains all genders, races, and creatures, and in which life and death are contained in an eternal relationship like the dark at night and the light in the morning. We have forgotten, but like Jung says, this way of seeing life, death, and survival is still present in us, and we can reconnect with it. Continue with the blessings. I love you. Bye.